But it's live. Hi everyone, welcome to the live session. We're going to be doing a session on sentence correction. I just want to make sure that you guys are able to hear me and see me properly. Then we'll get started with our discussion. Just want to make sure we... Okay. All right. So this is a session where we're going to be discussing 3 sentence correction questions. And lesson number 1, you do not say this is a session where we're going to be discussing 3 sentence correction questions. This is a session in which we're going to be discussing 3 sentence correction questions. Is a quick rule. We may speak however we want. That's perfectly fine. The other person gets the idea. But in general, grammar rule says that you use where to refer to a place and not to things or not to sessions, right? So you can say this is the country where I was born. That is perfectly fine. But you do not say this is a session where we're going to be discussing this. So in this session, we're going to talk about sentence correction. But before that, these sentences that we are going to be discussing are along similar lines in the sense that they're going to help you establish 2-3 important rules. So we're not going to look at a bunch of 7-8 different rules all over the place. And this session is also going to discuss questions that are in the 650 plus level. So if you are in the middle of your sentence correction preparation, or if you are just starting your GMAT and sentence correction preparation, then this is going to be super helpful for you in both establishing the rules and in learning how to apply them in terms of the sentences. When you're preparing for the GMAT, I would recommend that you give enough time for getting your basics in place and that you follow certain procedures to ensure that you have your basics in place. While such sessions will really help you understand how different people are approaching the sentences and how you have to be thinking about a particular sentence or an option, I would recommend that you take up a course, whether it's online or offline, and get your basics in place in as structured a fashion as possible. So start from learning what are the different parts of speech when it comes to sentence correction, what are the different rule categories, practice one rule category at a time. Make sure you do 10, 15, 20 questions, get that rule learned, and then move on to the next rule. Otherwise, if you're trying to learn something like grammar is a huge ocean, and you know that there are exceptions to this rule and there are certain conditions under which that rule applies and all of that. So it becomes this huge repertoire of rules that you're trying to remember. And if you're trying to overload everything at one point in time, or if you're taking a very unstructured approach to that learning, it's going to become very overwhelming. It is important that we plan our preparation in such a fashion that we are confident every step of the way about our ability to crack the GMAT. You should not be saying, I don't think this is the test for me, and giving up on something just because the preparation methodology is contributing to your frustrations. So make sure you structure your preparation and start your preparation now. If you are just exploring this in a very uncertain way, if you are targeting 2020 admissions, be it spring or fall, it's high time that you became serious about your GMAT preparation, right? So having said all of that, let's get started with the discussion of the sentences that we had posted on the community yesterday, a couple of days ago for the members. Just gonna make sure I do the screen sharing properly. It's been a little while since I did this, so stay with me. All right. All right, so we are going to be discussing the sentence correction session, and this is for a live session that is for members only, right? So we'll post 3 set questions. We're going to be looking at each of those questions. I'm going to be discussing question 1. So this is a question. Now, whenever you're solving a question, I would recommend that you read the original construction, the entire answer option, the entire original sentence, whether it's underlined or not, and then go to the answer options. This helps us do 2 things. One, When you understand what the intent of the original sentence is, it helps us take better calls on what grammar rules are likely to be tested there and what construction is likely to be the better construction. A lot of grammar rules, such as the use of modifiers and comparisons, are very closely tied to the intent that the sentence is trying to convey. So if you know the original intent, it becomes easier for you to apply such rules. Something like subject-verb agreement would probably not require that you know the intent of the sentence, but some grammar rules do. So in order to ensure that you take a more educated call on what's grammatically correct, it makes sense for you to stop and understand the meaning that the sentence is trying to convey. Another reason that you should read the original sentence in its entirety. In this particular sentence, the whole sentence is underlined, but that will not be the case all the time. You will have situations where a part of the sentence would be underlined and a part of the sentence would not be underlined. In such a case, when we go directly to the answer options, what happens is we end up focusing more on the underlined part and we forget about the part that is not underlined. Now, a lot of times there will be some kind of a clue or something in the non-underlined part that would help you determine what is the correct construction. So you need to be focusing on the non-underlined part as well, and to make sure you don't get into the habit of looking at only the underlined part, make sure that you are reading the entire sentence. Now, first understand the meaning of the sentence and then go to the answer option. So in this sentence, if we break down and understand the meaning of the sentence, we're trying to say, people who inhabit the land claim. So you have a group of people who are living somewhere and they're making a claim. What is the claim? Claim that they have not consented to oil projects. So these people who are living in a particular part of the world are saying that they have not consented to oil projects. And then there's a discussion. It says devastating the area's environment and threaten their way of life. So the sentence is probably trying to say that these oil projects would devastate the area's environment and threaten the way of life. And that's probably why these people who live there have not consented to the oil projects. So this is the meaning that the sentence is trying to convey. Now that we've understood it, let's go to the answer options and see what we can do there. A good idea would be to vertically scan through the answer options looking for differences. But when I read the original sentence, something really stood out for me. For one thing, it said, they have not consented to oil projects, devastating the area's environment. When we use a ing construction, when we use that kind of a participle clause, we usually use it to tie two verbs, usually to give some kind of a cause-effect relationship. So what the sentence ends up meaning is they claim they have not consented. Devastating the area's environment means that by not consenting, they are devastating. Not consenting ends up being the cause, devastating ends up being the effect. So it seems to be saying that by not giving consent to oil projects, they are actually devastating the area's environment, which is clearly not the intent of the sentence. You want to say that the oil projects are devastating, not the absence of consent for the oil projects. Another thing, if you notice, it says devastating the area's environment and threaten their way of life. There are two things that you are listing here. Now you need to remember that when you have a list of items, your items in the list have to be constructed uniformly. But we have said devastating in the ing form, in the participle form, and then threaten in the simple form. So clearly that is not uniformly constructed. So that's another reason that A does not work, and you can eliminate it. So whichever one you notice and you realize that this was incorrect, you could have used that to eliminate the answer options. Having eliminated A for this reason, what I'm going to also do is quickly read through the other options and see whether this particular mistake is repeating in any of my other options, because then I can straight away eliminate that option as well. What are the two things we're looking for? We want this devastate and threaten to refer to oil projects and not refer to something else in the sentence. And we want devastate and threaten to be uniformly constructed. Let's quickly run through the sentence and check that. I think very easy to spot would be that in all sentences, other options other than A, devastate and threaten, are used in the simple construction. So there is uniformity in all our options. The only thing we need to check for is whether it's making the correct reference. In B, it says oil projects that would devastate. So clearly the reference is to oil projects. In C, we are saying oil projects which would devastate. So again, the reference is clearly to oil projects. There is a that clause and a which clause. If it comes down to it, you can use that to eliminate options later, but that's the next call to take. Right now, I'm just holding on and checking to see whether we are making a reference to oil projects. In D, we're saying oil projects, comma, devastate. There's no connecting which, that, or something to tell me this is a modifier. So I'm going to take D a little slowly, read the entire sentence and see whether devastate is being used as a modifier in the first place. People who inhabit the land allege that they must not consent to oil projects, devastate the area's environment, and threaten their traditional way of life. So, this sentence seems to be giving me a list that tells me that the people who inhabit the land are alleging three things. They're alleging that they must not consent, that's the first thing. They devastate the area's environment and threaten their way of life. So this tells me that that there is a list of three items basically. Not consent, devastate, and threaten have been clubbed together as a list, and that makes no sense whatsoever. So that's something that you need to make check for. If you have a list, first ask yourself whether that list makes sense. Devastate and threaten makes sense, right? Because the oil projects are having two effects. They are devastating and threatening their way of life. But consenting, devastate, and threaten, all three of them as one list, definitely does not make sense. I would not go with D. I'm going to check E. It says in the area which would devastate. So here the modifier ends up referring to area. Always remember a modifier would refer to the word that is closest to it. So E also is incorrect because our what's devastating the environment? The area, not the oil projects. Our reference is incorrect. So D and E are out. I'm going to check what between B and C what makes sense. And quickly read the two options. B says, people who inhabit the land claim that they have not consented to oil projects that would devastate their environment and threaten their traditional way of life. Makes sense? We'll quickly check C. People inhabiting the land should claim that. Should claim that means that you're giving some kind of a recommendation. Whereas when I say claim that, I'm stating a fact. People are making a claim and I'm repeating what that claim is. That they have not consented for oil projects which would devastate the traditional environment of the area. Traditional environment of the area, it's the environment, the traditional way of life. That makes more sense. The environment, when we say environment here, we're not talking about the social environment, right? We're talking about the landscape. If I'm talking about the social environment, I can have something like the traditional environment. This is how the society used to be. This is not how the society is. But when I'm talking about the landscape though, saying traditional environment doesn't make any sense. Also, by saying should claim that, it sounds as if they've consented, but then this guy is saying, whoever is the author of the sentence, you should make the claim that you have not consented. So it sounds like he's making a recommendation that they lie about whether they've given consent or not. It's a very ambiguous sentence. Why are we making this recommendation? There's nothing to give that information in that sentence. So changing the meaning of an answer option is perfectly fine. But when an answer option's meaning changes, the call that you have to take is which of these answer options makes more logical sense? Is there a problem in the meaning that is conveyed by one of these answer options? In A, for example, saying devastating was a problem. It sounded as if not consenting is leading to a devastation. So even in B, we've changed the meaning. When we said that would devastate, the reference has gone from the consent to the oil projects. And that makes logical sense. And that's why between B and C, and across all your answer options, B would be the correct answer. Let's look at the next of our questions. So we're going to do the same process all over again. We're going to start by understanding the sentence, and then we're going to do the process of elimination. So what's the sentence that we are looking at? A Bureau of Reclamation report expected this week. So we're talking about a particular report. This report includes a potentially contentious idea. So there is a report, and that report is going to come up with an idea. What is this idea for? It's for building a pipeline and exporting water from the Missouri River. Okay, so we're taking water from the Missouri River. What is it for? To ease demand on the depleted Colorado River. So we have two rivers. The Missouri River, which has water, the Colorado River, which does not have water. So we're building a pipeline between it. At least that's the idea that this report is going to present. I don't know if this is going to be relevant to our understanding and answering of the sentence, but the idea has been described as a potentially contentious idea, which implies that clearly people are not going to be entirely in favor of the idea. Not everyone is going to be, at least. That seems to be the expectation. Right, so there's a report that's going to come up with a particular idea. The idea is to take water from one river and give it to another. Now, if you look at your answer options, which is our next step, we're going to do a quick vertical scan of the answer options and see if something pops out to us, something that we would want to use to eliminate answer options. One thing that is immediately evident when you look at the questions. So some of your options are saying for building and some of your options are saying of building. And then there's even an option that says that would help. All right, what is this for and of for? You have idea for or idea of or idea that. On the face of it, all three of these constructions are correct. If I say idea of, then I have to say what is the idea. I have this idea of doing this, taking these steps. I had the idea of listening to this live session that Shweta is doing in order to learn sentence correction rules. So idea of should be followed by what the idea is. Idea for is what is the purpose behind the idea. So you had the idea of listening to this live session for the purpose of improving your GMAT score. So you got an idea for improving your GMAT score. So idea of should be followed by a description of the idea. Idea for should be followed by what is the purpose of the idea. And idea that should be followed by what is some kind of a description, some modifier for the idea. As long as you're doing that, all three of these constructions are grammatically correct. Idea for building a pipeline would mean in this sentence that building a pipeline is the objective, not the idea itself. So I'm going to come up with some kind of a plan. What is the objective behind the plan? Build a pipeline. I have an idea of building a pipeline. What is my idea? Let's build a pipeline. Is my idea. So are you giving the purpose behind the idea or are you giving the idea itself? Is the kind of difference there? Either meaning seems to make sense to me. The idea could be that you're building a pipeline. The idea could be something with the purpose of building a pipeline. Maybe you're talking about the engineering behind it, whatever. Idea that would mean that you're going to give a description of the idea. What is the description we are giving? Idea that would help build a pipeline. The problem here is the words help build a pipeline, which seems to suggest what would the idea do? It would help build a pipeline. How is the idea going to help build a pipeline? That doesn't make any sense, right? You can say it's an idea that would be contentious. That's perfectly fine, which the sentence is already saying, but that's the kind of description that you would give after the word that. Some description of the idea, some modifier, some adjective maybe for the idea. Saying that the idea would help build a pipeline makes no sense. People would build the pipeline, not the idea. So what kind of information you're giving, what kind of modifier you're giving is something that matters. I would not go with E because it sounds as if the idea is going to go around building a pipeline. But down to A, B, C, D. And I'm seeing building a pipeline in all my answer options. But I have a list of items. Building a pipeline and export. We just discussed in the previous sentence as well, when you have a list, there has to be uniformity in the construction of the list. There are two things that this idea is going to be about. It's going to be about building a pipeline and exporting water would be the right construction. Use an ing construction here. You cannot use a simple construction here. We saw that, we're reiterating that A and B will not make sense. There's no uniformity, parallel construction. But C and D both say building a pipeline and exporting water or discharging water. I have uniformity, building and exporting, building and discharging. So I will eliminate A and B because there's no parallel construction in the sentence. Brings me down to C and D. I'm going to read the two answer options really quickly. So there's an idea of building a pipeline and exporting water from the Missouri River to ease the demands on the depleted Colorado River. And there is an idea for building a pipeline and discharging water from the Missouri River. Don't get hung up on exporting versus discharging water. I would suggest that you look for other differences in meaning other than the particular choice of words. So, or other differences in grammar. So I'm going to not focus on exporting and discharging. I'm going to look at other differences. From the Missouri River, which will ease the demands. Again, this is a point that we've been reiterating in this particular video. When you have a modifier, it will refer to the word right next to it. Which will ease the demands made on the Colorado River sounds as if the Missouri River will ease the demands made on the Colorado River. But is that what we want to say? What's going to ease the demand? It's not the river that is going to ease the demand. It is the pipeline that is going to ease the demand. So you've given a modifier that is not referring to the pipeline, but is incorrectly referring to the Missouri River. And that is the reason D will not work. How does C work? We're talking about an idea. For this idea, I'm giving you two bits of information. It's an idea of building a pipeline and exporting water. And what is the idea for? It is to ease the demands on the depleted Colorado River. So I'm telling you what's the idea and what's the purpose of the idea. Both of these are covered in C, right? So we're giving two descriptions of the idea. The sentence makes sense And that is why for the second question, C is going to be the right answer. We have one last question to do. It's a super long question, but it's not the entire sentence is not underlined, but you can still see that a significant portion of the long sentence is underlined. So make sure you really understand the sentence and you break it down into its parts. And then you go to the answer options, because a lot of times people have trouble with long sentences. Well, some people have trouble with short sentences. People develop these phobias, right? And they will come to me and they will say, Shweta, I'm getting all questions right, except when they're really long sentences. Then that freaks me out. Or someone will come to me and say, Shweta, I get the questions right, except when there are only 3 words that are underlined. That really freaks me out. So we end up having phobias. Depending on what our comfort level in the grammar rules are, we don't stop to ask ourselves, why is that happening? Because sometimes a long sentence might be underlined. Usually sentences are long because they have modifiers or different multiple parts given together. If a long sentence is underlined, 2 things can happen. Very minor changes can be made across your sentences. So for all you know, the sentence could just be testing you on pronouns and subject-verb agreement. And the long sentence has been underlined just to throw you off your comfort zone. Or the long sentence could be underlined and each construction can be entirely different because they're playing around with the ordering of information and they're playing around with the structure of the sentence. And when a short sentence is underlined, it could be simple grammar rules application or it could be word usage. So what you need to be doing is, instead of saying long sentences or short sentences freak me out, you should be saying, I have a lower accuracy when it comes to idioms. I have a lower accuracy when it comes to modifiers. I have a higher accuracy when it comes to this kind of a rule. When you do that, you're identifying specific weak areas within your sentence correction preparation, and that is going to help you scale up your preparation. Then let me go back and do questions on idioms. It doesn't matter whether the sentences are long or short. That's what you should ideally be doing, identifying why long or short sentences freak you out, rather than saying long or short sentences are your enemies, right? Anyways, let's look at this particular sentence. I'm going to break down the meaning of the sentence. Now, because the sentence is particularly long, I'm not presenting the answer options here because I just want to have enough screen space to talk about the sentence and to talk about the meaning. So sentence starts by saying, of all Victorian women poets. Okay, so we're talking about of all Victorian women poets, posterity has been kindest to Christina Rossetti. So we're talking about Christina Rossetti. And she is clearly a Victorian poet because we've said of all Victorian poets, right? I'm saying posterity has been kindest to her. What does posterity mean? Posterity basically means future generations. So when you say posterity has been kindest to Christina Rossetti, what you're essentially saying is, we're not talking necessarily about her future generations. We are basically saying that the future era, the era that came after her, or in the years from when she lived till now, things have been good for her, is what you're saying. And when you say things have been good for her, well, she's not alive. What you're trying to say is that her work is still surviving. Her work has withstood the challenges posed by multiple timelines or multiple eras. That's what you're trying to say in a sentence. So when you say posterity has been kindest to Christina Rossetti, we're basically saying she was a Victorian poet who lived long ago, but her work is still surviving. And that is what the rest of the sentence explains when it says, whose poetry has never disappeared from you. Why are we saying that posterity has been kind to her? Because her poetry has still survived. It has never disappeared from you. And her reputation has always been preserved to some degree. Even though her reputation suffered a decline for a while, it's still preserved. So she is still staying in, we're still talking about her. Her poetry is still surviving, is ultimately what the sentence is trying to say. All right, let's go to the answer options. Sentence started by saying, of all Victorian women poets. Now immediately my mind went to asking, what poets? Of who among all Victorian poets are we talking about? But the word right after says, of all Victorian poets, posterity is the word right after in A and B. That makes no sense to me, because of all Victorian poets becomes a modifier and the word right after it is posterity. So it sounds as if the modifier is referring to posterity. Posterity was never a Victorian poet. The Victorian poet here is Christina Rossetti. So the ideal construction should say Christina Rossetti of all Victorian women poets. So you want this modifier of all Victorian women poets to be placed next to Rossetti. And that's not happening in A and B, modifier error. I'll rule it out. I'm going to quickly check the other options. First glance, immediately I see A and B are wrong, but C, D, E are starting with posterity, so I kind of need to search for the modifier and find it. So C says, posterity has been kindest to, of all Victorian women poets, Rossetti. Perfect. It's next to Rossetti. The same construction is used in D, so that's also next to Rossetti, perfectly fine. And then in E, we're saying posterity has been kindest to Christina Rossetti of all Victorian women poets. We don't care whether the modifier is placed before the word or after the word that we are referring to. It just has to be physically next to the word, beside the word that it's referring to. So the modifier placement in C, D, E seems to be perfectly fine. So I'm going to eliminate A and B, but I'm still keeping C, D, E in play. For your reference, because of lack of space, again, we've not given A completely, but then the original question is visible on the screen, and you know that the original and option A are always the same construction. Let's see C, D, E. Now, when I look at C, D, E, I can kind of see that C and D are very similar in construction. So I'm going to kind of look through the two options and see what is the difference between them, because at first glance, they seem very similar. Reading both C and D simultaneously, vertically scanning, looking for differences. Posterity has been kindest to of all Victorian women poets, Christina Rossetti, whose poetry as well as reputation versus never disappeared. Okay, so this seems to be the difference. In C, we're saying her poetry never disappeared and whose reputation. So we've talked about the poetry and the reputation separately. Whereas in D, we're saying poetry as well as her reputation. So we're clubbing them together and then talking about them. So if I read the rest of D, it says as well as reputation, though suffering a decline, has never disappeared from view and has always been preserved to some degree. So by clubbing, what happens is all the descriptions that follow seem to be for both the poetry and the reputation simultaneously. Sentence ends up meaning that both the poetry and the reputation suffered a decline in the first half. Both the poetry and the reputation has never disappeared from view and both have been preserved to some degree. It's likely that you would say the poetry hasn't disappeared from you, but what do you mean when you say the reputation has not disappeared from you? Why would someone's reputation always be in our view? It's fine to say both the poetry and the reputation has been preserved to some degree, that makes sense. But why would the poetry suffer a decline in the first half of the 20th century? That does not make any sense, because the poetry was not written in the 20th century to begin with. She was a Victorian poet, so it was written in the Victorian era. So the poetry was not there being formed in the 20th century for you to say that. So within the underlined portion, the descriptions that are given there, you cannot club the descriptions and give them for both the poetry and the reputation simultaneously. That does not make any sense. So I'm going to go ahead and eliminate D. That's out. C and E. E, posterity has been kindest to Christina Rossetti of all Victorian women poets whose poetry never disappeared. Whose poetry did not disappear from you? Christina Rossetti. But what is the modifier next to? Women poets. So we kind of have, this is a rule we've seen through these sentences. Modifier has to be placed next to the word it's referring to. The word next to your modifier here is women poets. So it sounds as if women poets, we're talking about the poetry of all Victorian women poets rather than the poetry of Christina Rossetti. If we are talking about the poetry of all Victorian women poets, where is the justification for saying that posterity has been kindest to Christina Rossetti? How has her work stood out? There's no information in the sentence, so that does not make any sense, which means for this question, your answer has to be C. Posterity has been kindest to of all Victorian poets, Christina Rossetti, whose poetry, so this modifier is referring to Rossetti, this modifier is also referring to Rossetti. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So when we are working on your sentences, the reason we pick these particular sentences in order to do this discussion, 1 second, let me just move back to me. Okay, right. So the reason we picked this particular set of sentences to do this discussion is you find that there are common patterns across these sentences. If anything, we talked about just 2, 3 broad rules. We talked about a couple of word usage, but we predominantly focused on having uniformity in the sentence whenever you have a list of items, and we focused on the placement and usage of different kinds of modifiers. We talked about modifiers with which, we talked about modifiers without that, we talked about ing modifiers. So you have learned some common set of things across these 3 sentences. Whenever you're learning and practicing sentence correction, it is important that you practice questions from one source. It is important that you do it one topic at a time. That will make sure that you're learning one concept, you found looked at different kinds of questions that can be tested within the concept, and you're really confident about it before you move on to trying out different stuff. It's important to do tons of assorted practice, but don't start off by doing tons of assorted practice. One topic at a time, learn it, master it, and then move on to the next topic. If that happens, when you read a sentence, when you read of all Victorian women poets, comma, posterity, you won't have to read the rest of the answer option to say, this is grammatically incorrect, this is a modifier, why are we talking about posterity, eliminate, look for options that say the same thing, eliminate. Your answering is going to be so much faster, so much more accurate, because you've made yourself proficient in it. So please do that. Make sure you learn your concepts very well, ground your rules, learn your concepts, be strong in them, and don't just answer by instinct. Most of us have reasonably good instincts, but not perfect instincts. So please make sure you answer based on structured reasons.